I'm starting, this is a brand new section, all right? Now, typically, I used to start this and call this module the homosexual person. And I did that to make sure that we're always grounding this in the fact of not reducing it to a sexuality, but in the person of a human being. But I thought this is much more to do with just, the human person. So, so I changed the title a little bit, and I'm starting a little different too. This usually came the second day. So there's a few things that I want you to keep in mind as we move on, is that everything is rooted in dignity of the human person. And we still understand that there are things that we have a human nature, and that nothing of this changes our human nature. Remember, we can never abdicate our own self-worth. We cannot transfer that to anybody else. So I just want to keep that in mind, and I'll boil it down to that, and we'll move right in. So I have 3 slides, one on sex, one on gender, one on sexuality. We'll see that these are not synonyms, okay? And as you see me move through these, please pay specific attention to my tone. You won't find a moment of mocking in my tone. I don't care what I put up there. I'm very sincere about this. I also know that we are not going to solve all of life's riddles concerning this issue today, or even tomorrow, all right? We can't cover every aspect of it. That being said, I'll still give you a decent overview that will help us in our discussions and in our dialectic, okay? Oh, and let me say that, maybe that's a good point. There's a reason why I use dialectic, because that should be how you think. Dialectic whittles away error to find truth. It doesn't start out with saying, I know everything, or even that I know what truth is. You start out by asking questions, and you're open to what might be opposing to you in a way that it might inform you and help you whittle down the truth. I know when I teach this, because I've seen it and heard it from students in the past years. Okay, so I'm a Catholic male moral theologian teaching on this. You may not agree with the Catholic Church, or maybe you're not Catholic and don't necessarily care. And the wall goes up, okay? Well, we already have issues in our country with the inability to have discussions. And I think we need to move beyond that, all right? I think we have to be able to engage each other in some sort of dialogue and maintain respect. You see how politically divided we are. All right, there's a lot of reasons for that. But wouldn't it be nice if we could at least have discussions across the board? Okay, I think that would be rather important. The information that I'm going to be presenting to you here is not Catholic information. It comes from the World Health Organization, which obviously has no connection to the Catholic Church or its teaching. And I'll tell you as we go why I'm doing that. The other thing is that, and somebody asked me in one of the earlier classes, when you're talking about this outside of the school, do you ever get accused of being a bigot? Yes. For whatever reason, changing an understanding of sexuality and sex, it does affect me, but if I hold this position, I do, get that from time to time. Perhaps you do too. I don't think that's healthy, all right? Somebody once said to me, why don't you teach about straight sexuality more than homosexuality? The fact is I do. When I do those 2.5-hour talks for engaged couples, out of 2.5 hours, I think maybe about, and I'm not even exaggerating, 90 seconds of it touches on homosexuality. I mean, that's how unimportant it is in the scheme of things. But it's part of our society. We have to address this, all right? Sometimes things that aren't as important get more attention because of what's going on. So what I want you to do is just be open. And let's be careful that oftentimes in our world, the level of outrage is what determines the veracity of an argument. If a person gets all fired up and gets passionate, somehow that makes up for what they may be lacking in the truth of what they're saying. Let's also remember emotional subjectivism, right? That whatever's connected to a genuine emotion, we feel that's very authentic. That's natural for us as human beings. And when a person, I didn't get into this prior, but there's a reductive understanding of the human person. I don't begin to see myself as heterosexual. That's not the primary way I view myself. I'm a human person. Heterosexuality is part of that. Sometimes people identify very closely with these orientations, which means if it seems like you're opposing that, then you're attacking them. I understand that. I don't think it's a valid way to look at it, but I understand that's where they're coming from. All right. So I'm going to be as indifferent as I move through this, and what I'd like to say scholarly about it. And you won't see me laughing or joking or mocking. Let's start out by this. Sex is a biological classification. It's male or female. These are not constructs, right? We don't make them up. They are not constructs, nor are they assigned. Nobody assigns you your female or male status. Nobody can make you a male or a female, all right? This, by the way, is from now on, the World Health Organization. You'll just see the initials, WHO. That is the URL for it, although it's no longer valid. You just got to get rid of that little EN. They took away that EN, and it brings you to the same page. It took me about 20 minutes to find it this morning. So what we are told is that we are born with 46 chromosomes. I know that that's not always true, but that's almost all. We're born with 46 chromosomes. If you have two X's, you're a female. If the Y chromosome is there, you are a male. That's a biological determination. You can't make that, all right? You can't construct that socially. There are variations on that, all right? It is not always XX and XY. But I want to say that those are abnormalities. They are not distinct sexes. Okay? They are not distinct sexes. And what I mean by that is this. I read an article in the New York Times that said science now shows that there are at least 6 different sexes. Okay, that is not true. As I read through the article and saw what he was quoting a lot of what I'm going to show you here. They are abnormalities. They are not distinct sexes. Now, I'm going to put them up there, and I don't expect you to remember them. But if you see these things show up in a quiz, you don't need to know what Turner syndrome is. If I say Turner syndrome and Klinefelter syndrome are distinct sexes from male and female, I could put any word in there. There are no other sexes, all right? So let me just show you basically what these are. Turner syndrome and I believe in Klinefelter syndrome were discovered in the 40s. This is a rare live birth frequency of 1 to 3,000, but only 1 in 40 affected zygotes actually develop the term. So it's very rare. They experience abnormal growth patterns. They're short in stature, and they generally lack prominent female secondary sexual characteristics. And by secondary sexual characteristics, we're talking about stature, other feminine features on the body. Okay. In some instances of Turner syndrome, there is slight mental retardation. And the WHO, again, is World Health Organization. The XXX females actually grab that extra chromosome. So these women are usually taller and they have slender builds. Now we're talking about 1 in 1,000. They have no severe phenotype associated with the 3X chromosomes in women's. They may have a slight learning difficulties. So you can go your whole life and probably have no idea that this is you. Because it doesn't really, it's just the fact that you have an extra X chromosome. If there's other health issues with it, I'm unaware. And these are really screenshots from the website. Klinefelter syndrome is a male phenotype. It's a most pervasive sex chromosomal anomaly and affects approximately 1 in 600 males. They carry 2 or more X's, results in abnormal development of the testes, leading to hypogonadism and infertility. The affected individuals usually are tall, produce relatively small amounts of testosterone. They're probably more effeminate. As a result of this hormone imbalance, affected males have incompletely developed secondary male sex characteristics. All right. But again, an abnormality, not a different sex. The XYY males, they inherit an additional Y, which means they're going to have more of the testosterone, right? So they're probably going to have increased levels of acne. They will be fertile, and they're probably unaware their whole life that they have this. We're talking here about 1 in 1,000. So these people typically will be born and die and never have any idea that they are XYY. But again, it's not a separate sex, okay? Hermaphroditism, I realize that that's a term that's often not accepted as, politically correct. They'd rather the word intersex. But the World Health Organization website lists them separately, all right? So I'm just following their lead. But this is where we have, this is where, there really is an issue, okay? We have people with mature ovarian and testicular tissue. There's no population-wide estimates, but the autosomal inheritance of this condition suggests that genes controlling sexual development and differentiation are not limited to sex chromosomes. So there's other factors in play, all right? So I'm not trying to say this is the sum of it. We realize there's other factors in play, and if we had more time, we'd probably talk a little bit about the neuroscience of it and other aspects, the social aspects of it. But nonetheless, they say with other inherited forms of sexual ambiguity, there may be pockets, perhaps even large geographical regions with relatively high frequencies of true hermaphroditism, all right? I read in one article that a gentleman was in his 60s and had ultrasound, and they found an underdeveloped uterus. He had no idea. He had children, so it didn't affect anything in his reproductive system, but somewhere along the line, there was an underdeveloped uterus. You'll find with some girls, there might be underdeveloped testicles. They just never develop, but they're there on an ultrasound, right? Doesn't constitute a different sex. That's my point, okay? Oh, sorry about that. They clicked off too quick. So let me tell you what that said. What that said was, sex is determined genetically and biologically. Sex is determined genetically and biologically, not through hormone therapy or cosmetic operations. So sex is determined genetically and biologically, not through hormone therapy or by a cosmetic operation, all right? So people who do transgender, okay, there's all sorts of, I guess you want to say, degrees to which one can go. But if you wanted to use everything that was available to you, both in hormone therapy and cosmetic surgery, you obviously, if you're going from male to female, you obviously would start estrogen therapy, which probably means you would reduce hair growth, facial and other areas. You would then, if you wanted to, would have cosmetic surgery. They literally would invert the penis to make a cosmetic vagina. It's absolutely not a functional. You're not going to have children. They can't make that person have a child. And they could even go and have the vocal cords shaved to help raise the tone. The estrogen will do that, but also will the cosmetic surgery. My point is that doesn't make the man a female, all right? If they stop the estrogen therapy, they're going to slowly, get facial hair and have their voice change unless they had it shaved. It doesn't change anything, all right? Yes? Yep. Okay, so now about gender. And again, this is from the World Health Organization. Gender is an identity based on the terms masculine and feminine, okay? Gender is an identity based on the terms masculine and feminine. So those that are in Latin languages, you know that nouns have a gender, all right? Nouns aren't male and female, but they have a masculinity and a femininity. Now, you don't need to know this, but it is true that gender and sex were synonyms 100 or so years ago. That has changed. So we have to be very clear. Equivocation is when you use the same word to mean different things, or different words to mean the same thing. We have to watch that. Like, in other words, today, if I were to tell you two people were making love, you would assume they're having sexual intercourse. 100 years ago, if you were students and I was a teacher and I said two people are making love, you would assume they're courting. That's what that word meant. He was trying to, go out with her and marry her. All right, that's what he wanted. So words do change, but nonetheless, today they're distinct. So that's based on the terms masculinity and femininity. Now, when I say this, I don't mean this to make a joke, right? There have always been women who were more masculine. There's always been men who were more feminine. There's nothing that has changed about that. When I was younger, we just, and again, I am not making fun. We would call those men who were more feminine girlies, and the girls were butch. Now, was that always a derogatory term? Well, I can tell you that in my parochial school, we had Sister Butch. That wasn't a real name, but everybody called her that, and she was fine with it. Why? Because every time there was kickball, baseball, you name it, she was out there. I mean, she ran like the rest of them, right? So everybody called her Sister Butch, and she thought that was pretty funny. My sister, who is absolutely a female, was more masculine in her approaches in the early 70s. She was the first woman to run the marathon, upstate. So, but at no point, she just knew that she was a woman who was very good at doing what was typically male things, okay? So now we're into social constructs here. Okay, now we know that there are certain things that are going to be fluid. This is from the American College of Pediatricians. I got this off their website last year. They urge educators and legislators to reject all policies that condition children, and I don't know what age they're saying. It could be prepubescent, but pediatricians often see people into their teens. As a normal life of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex. In other words, they'll call it child abuse. They've called it that, right? They want facts, not ideology, to determine reality. Now, I'm all for that, and I don't want to make this political, but we had a science march on Saturday, and I think it's a very good thing, and I mean that sincerely. But, I'd be hard-pressed to find someone to literally stand up in the media and talk about sex and gender from a scientific point of view. And I'm not sure why that is. I hope it's not ideology, but I have a feeling that's where some of it's left. So what do they say? These pediatricians say human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait. This false binaries is almost like a cliche today. But there are binaries. XX and XY are genetic markers of health. They are not genetic markers of a disorder. All right? No one is born with a gender. Now, this isn't the Catholic point of view. This is the pediatricians. Everyone's born with a biological sex. Gender, your awareness and sense of yourself as male or female, is a sociological and psychological concept, not an objective biological one. A person's belief that he or she is thinking something they are not is, at best, a sign of confused thinking, and they probably would say, at the worst, it's a psychological disorder. All right? Now, that's science, but we have a hard time bringing this up, right? Nonetheless. So your gender, or one's gender, is expressed in the modern world as a social construct that varies by culture. All right? We're going to have to admit that there's some variation. One's gender is expressed in the modern world as a social construct that varies by culture. Now, you do not need to know these things and memorize them. I'm going to show you a few. But you should be able to recognize them. In other words, if I bring one of these words up in a matching, or not matching, like in a multiple choice, and I say, are one of these a distinct sex? You should be able to say no, because it doesn't matter what I put there, there's only two sexes, right? So there have appeared non-binary genders in a number of cultures. Years ago, when I was teaching this, students would bring these up, because there was always some that would love to do the research before, and then, try to show there's some variations of what I'm thinking. So I would address that, but now I just include them. I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm just going to butcher it, but the Burtiki are in the North American Indian tribes. In some North American Indian tribes, there were males who were assumed the role of women in the camp, okay? That could be with cooking, they didn't go and hunt, and the like. Now, the word two spirits is really from like the 1990s. That they were not called two spirits, but LGBT advocates in the 90s that were referring to this group, started referring to them as two spirits. The Fa'afine in the Pacific, it's a Samoan word. It just means the way of the woman, right? So they would live as the way a woman would, okay? In Thailand, that group, I knew these people as the man boys, right? They were very slender, young-looking men who would take on the persona of a woman and then sleep with other men, okay? We understand that these pockets have existed. But let me just say this. If we take world history, and we take all the cultures in world history, and we pop these few groups up, I mean, it doesn't even show up as a blip. It's hard to make the case to saying, because this existed, therefore, you know, we can have various genders and sexes today. So I want to say this so that I'm very clear. The gender variations that we're talking about here do not line up with our modern notion of homosexuality. Okay? A person who was a homosexual that had any sort of reasoning ability would not say, you should accept me because of the two spirits, because of the man boys. They realize that's a separate issue. And I'm trying to say it's a separate issue. Okay? So we have to be careful to think that this is evidence to substantiate an orientation. Okay? Now, I'm only going to say the briefest thing about this, because this it's a very broad subject. My buddy, Mr. Len Klein, shows up once a week in my activity period, and we sit around and talk philosophy. And he showed up Monday, and we were talking about deconstruction and how exactly one defines that. Well, it's not easy to define, so I'm going to probably do it injustice by giving you a real quick talk about it. But really, it's when we consider the essence of a thing by how it appears to us. All right? When we consider the essence of a thing by how it appears to us. You know, for instance, if you guys, anybody here planning on being an English major in college? No? All right. You would study deconstructionism because it started in literary theory, and it came out of the 1960s. And its basis was that words have no inherent meaning. So if we say, wow, that poem is deep, what do you mean by deep? Well, you look up deep in the dictionary, and it could mean profound. Did you mean profound? Look up profound. What does that mean? Outstanding. So you're saying that's outstanding. You know, in other words, words are always used to define other words, and you can wind up in a terrible circle and never get to the meaning of a thing. All right? Well, the problem I think with that is it never has context. If I was standing in front of the ocean and said, that's deep, you know what I mean. If I'm looking at a quote and I say, that's deep, you know what I mean. All right? That being said, deconstruction kind of brought something away. It doesn't understand a true nature of anything. All right? So in certain psychotherapies that would, you know, use this, right, there's no nature to a human person. Well, if there's no nature to a human person, then we're going to have some flexibility. So you tie that in with the sexual revolution, everything else that came out of the 60s, because this came out of the 60s, you can see why we're at a point now where we're, you know, people are actually debating whether or not males are males and females are females. Which, by the way, let me just say this, because this kind of gets lost sometimes in the argument. I hope this isn't too subtle for you to pick up on. When people say that there is no definite male and female, then how can you be transgender? How can you go from, what are you going from and what are you going to? I mean, you can't go from male to female unless there is such a thing as male that we can identify, and such a thing as female. If it's all that fluid, then you really can't be transgender, because what are we just talking? Are they a spectrum? Maybe they'll say that, okay? But it gets to be a difficult argument. All right. Now, here's the last point I want to make on this before we move on to sexuality. If we say that a person can assume a gender, a sex, outside, in other words, if a person could say that I was born male, but I've never been a male, so I want to identify as a female. If we can say that, why do we only limit that to a person's sex? Why can it not be other things, right? If it's going to be something like the pediatrician said, if it's going to be something other than your reality, why only sex? So I have some examples here, and under no circumstances am I mocking any of these people or trying to solicit laughter from you, all right? But let me make my point. This individual, I don't know his name, was probably in his 40s, married, had a couple kids, but he always identified as a young girl. So he says, okay? So he left his family, and he was adopted by another couple, and he's now a 7-year-old girl with an older 9-year-old sister. He dresses like a 7-year-old girl. He does everything a 7-year-old girl does. He plays with dolls. He sits on the couch with his parents and watches cartoons. Now, somebody might be thinking, well, that's different, because he's not really 7 years old. But see, if you can be something other than your reality, why only sex? Because a person who says they're female but they're male, they're still male. They're identifying as a female. Well, then can a person identify as a different age, right? This woman was a chapter representative of the NAACP, I think out in the Washington, Seattle area. And it came, you may have heard about it, came out under scrutiny because she's not black. Now, there's nothing wrong with a person who'd be white advocating for, the NAACP, but she wasn't advocating, she was saying, I'm black. Well, it was quite the scandal. Has anybody heard of this one? Okay, so it became quite the scandal, but she says she wasn't lying, she's transracial. She's changed her name. She was in the news this week, actually. She was down in South Africa talking about the struggles of a transracial woman. And I am not making fun when I say it did not go over well to the audience, But nonetheless, okay, she's not black. But if she identifies that, it's not her reality, how are we going to say, well then, why not? Okay. This is very interesting. I don't have a photo here because, I couldn't find one anyway. Apotemophilia. I saw this on Nat Geo. It was a guy who said his right leg was foreign to him. It was not his leg. Okay. He's not the only one. I found out that, so in other words, he said it would be as odd for you if you're holding a prosthetic leg and somebody says this is your real leg. You'd be saying no, it is not. So he was under psychiatric care, but he demanded for doctors to amputate his leg. Well, they wouldn't, right? Which, by the way, let me just say, for anybody who says that you have total autonomy over your body, it's my body, I can do what I want, no, you cannot. You cannot go to a doctor and demand your right arm be amputated. And you can't demand that by saying, I have the rights, this is my body. That's not how that works, right? So what he did is he took things into his own hands. He buried his right leg into dry ice until it basically rotted, and they had to amputate it. And now he's cured. He's fine, because it's gone. I read another story about a guy who identified, and you understand, I'm not mocking any of this. If you can't pick up that tone in my voice. Another man who identified since he was young as a paraplegic. He got both legs taken off, so he can live as a paraplegic. Now he feels fine and cured. Okay, that's not the reality, right? We know that's not a reality, but on what basis would we deny them that if we wouldn't deny somebody to change the sex that's not the reality? I'm trying to use logic here, okay? This last one's a little bit of a stretch, I admit, but nonetheless, as far as I can tell, she's quite sincere. She doesn't believe she's human. Now, she's not the only person that has done this, right? I knew one, when I say knew, I saw them on TV, where a man literally had implants. He thought he was a leopard. So, okay, so he tattooed himself in leopard, he had implants and everything. Okay, so I know this is a little bit different than the other ones, so I'm not trying to equate them all, I'm certainly not making fun. But obviously she's not feline. That's not the reality. But my point is, on what basis would we deny a person to be something other than they are not? So if we ever get the opportunity to teach logic here, you will eventually learn syllogisms. And here's how a syllogism works, right? somebody might say what I've just presented to you is what's known as a slippery slope argument, right? Just because one doesn't mean the other. That's not what a slippery slope argument is. A slippery slope argument is when there's no causal link or a logical progression. In other words, they stop people, allowing people to smoke in bars. What's next? They'll probably tell you can't smoke in your own living room. No, there's really no causal link. Public, private, right? Here's the argument. If a person's making an argument for transgenderism, this is what they would say. A person should be able to assume an expressed identity other than a given reality, all right? In other words, they believe they were always something other than they were, even though biology says otherwise. An expressed identity is a person's gender, okay? That's what they're saying. So therefore, a person should be able to assume the gender other than their given reality. That's a transgender argument. All I'm saying is, can't we simply place, say race or age in there? And if you say no, I'd have to ask you why not. Well, it's different. That's not, but the difference is we're talking about something that's other than a reality. We have to watch, right? Anyway, okay. We got 10 minutes. Let's do sexuality. Now, we are going to talk about the biology of homosexuality tomorrow, or the worst case scenario, Monday. Sexuality is an orientation. What is my sexuality? I'm heterosexual. I have always felt that way, all right? If somebody was a homosexual and they said they've always felt that way, I would argue with them. You never argue with somebody who expresses to you feelings of sincerity, all right? If somebody says, I feel sad, you don't argue and say, no, you don't, right? So if a person says they've always felt that way. So we will talk about that another time, in what degree does a person have a choice. Sexuality is the expression of your sensual and your emotional desires. Now, when it's properly integrated, right? When it's properly integrated, it's a healthy and innate drive, right? Our sexuality is healthy and it's innate. I mean, we should be sexually attracted to other people. When it's expressed in line with natural law, it will result in a male-female relationship, okay? When it's in line with natural law, it will result in a male-female relationship. Now let me just say this as an aside. I struggle with my sexuality. That should be no surprise to any of you. If it is, you must think I'm dead. I'm attracted to women. That doesn't stop when you're married. You have to properly order that. I'll show you a letter written by a man who's a homosexual who's married to a woman and is still sexually attracted to other men. And I'll let you see how he plays it out. So the idea is that in some ways we're all broken, right? If I see a woman I find attractive, I can admit it and think it, I have to make sure that it's properly ordered, all right? So this isn't so what the problem is, and this is what's the problem with unmarried people and homosexual and heterosexual people, that some people don't know how to express love other than sex, right? It seems like the logical next thing. So if friends that I have who are homosexual say, they wouldn't say it because they know how I feel, are you trying to say I don't love him? No. I'm sure your love for him is as deep as it can be. I mean, why would I deny that to somebody? But this isn't about love, all right? We're talking about something else here, right? Sexuality. Okay. Homosexuality is a term. Obviously it applies to either male or female. Although it always didn't. It's just attraction to the same sex. There's no big discovery here with what this means. So it's the term applied to either male or female that they're attracted to the same sex. But the point I want to make is that, and this is going to be a little nuanced for you to get, for somebody to identify themselves as oriented towards attraction to the same sex, this is kind of relatively new. Have we had people who have had sex with same sex in the past? Absolutely. But the identification is kind of novel. And as a matter of fact, the word comes from the late 1800s. the word homosexual. It actually, it comes from the 1800s. Before that, the word was homogenic, or sexual inversion. So it went from homogenic sexual inversion, then the word eventually popped up as homosexual in the late 1800s. It wasn't until like 1920s before the word lesbian showed up, all right? So at that time, it was applied strictly to men. We now apply it to orientation. So I'm just trying to say that, you know, as I show you certain instances of male-male relationships, say back in ancient Greece, you can't think in terms of homosexual, because that's not how they looked at it. I know that might sound a little odd to you, but we'll get into that another day. So what we're going to do, and this is the last part of the slide, we will make a distinction that both males and females have various levels of control, right? So if somebody says to me, I've been attracted to, of a male, says to me, I've been attracted to women my whole life. I have no memories of not being attracted to a woman. Why would I not believe him? If a male says to me, I've been attracted to men my whole life, I've never not been attracted to men, why would I not believe him? This isn't about arguing with people over who they are or not attracted to, okay? I'll finish it for you, then I do want to talk about this. Okay, over their sexuality, but they don't have to act on the impulse. Okay, that's the end. They don't have to act on the impulse. So we're going to make a distinction that both males and females have various levels of control, or maybe none, over their sexuality, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have to act on the impulse. I'll give you an example. All right, so we're going to look at the genetics and the epigenetics and the sociological backgrounds of orientation. Everybody has their own stories. So a very good friend of ours, well, we haven't seen her in years, she used to work for us. She was lesbian. She lived with her girlfriend. Her girlfriend threw her out of the house. We left her to live with us for 3 or 4 months. Under no circumstances, she knew how I felt. Under no circumstances would I would try to, badger her. But she wanted to talk about it one time. She goes, you never asked me why I'm lesbian. I said, well, I guess you were born that way. That's what they say. She goes, well, I wasn't. She says, some of my sisters, and she referred to other lesbians as her sisters, she goes, they always felt that way. She goes, I was attracted to males when I was younger. If I told you what her father and uncles did, it's disgusting. She says, I cannot even think of being close to a man. So she admits that for her, that's it, right? So that'd be one aspect where a person physically chose that. There's also experimentation. It's hard. Let me say this and then we'll be done. Just listen a second. Growing up, we were always told by me, my generation, that there's between 10 and 14% of the population is homosexual. That was based on reports out of the Kinsey reports out of the 40s and 50s. It's not really true. You're probably looking somewhere between 2 and 4%. It's not an easy number to come up with, because not everybody who's attracted to the same sex considers themselves homosexual. So this is self-identifying. It also changed because once AIDS was no longer the death sentence that it's not now, but in the 80s it was. So some of the data from that era really skewed things. Also, it's also found that people experiment. Now, this is sort of new, because in any society where it's more acceptable, you'll find a higher increase. Now, sociologically, it's hard to say why that's true. Some people might say, well, because they feel less inhibited, so they come out. Other people say, well, there's less inhibition, so they try it out. It's hard to say. In my day, I can't imagine anybody experimenting with homosexuality. But today, they say it's about 15 to 25% of people between the ages of 14 and 40, and particularly in college, right? So the numbers aren't important. That's not what I'm trying to say on this. All I'm trying to say is we can never nail down exactly why one person is or is not. You take people on their words. If they say they've never felt an attraction other than what they did, well, me too. Just towards women. So I accept that. Any questions?